还真的要对明给举是好心，我到了做中的各地，我个波塔到海地，ก็了这几例家天，我要对明呢，在个么也例家。With the cases of domestic violence that comes to your attention, can you speak about the decision-making process and how cases are allocated?
有系龙帮咧，就俾每一年时，弄落多喏就来话要叫老师嚟样，那就古人包系啲，叫话啦，要包系龙帮贴，俾我俾就叫朋友嚟样อเมริกาตั้งสี่กู系龙帮，vì thế弄喏俾就年叫自多啦，ไอ้กู系喏分到咗话 cases 多种的古路 office，分古程到我哋一叫咪因为要啷的俾下 cultural differences，但对起。ví dụ là tiền tết chầu bé và bé khó khăn bé cho mình đúng rồi lỡ chỉ xe lỡ chỉ cần đó lỡ một chút sát tốt nhiều thì bé nhìn nhận tàu lỡ rồi ok thì tên nói là bé muốn tàu lỡ thì sổ vào chạy tết chỉ mà bé xí chế xí tàu xí dự thứ mà bé xí tử nó là xí tử thì có tàu xí tàu cũng như có chỉ để là something like that ok chế vấn là chỉ chỉ muốn tàu kia thế bây giờ đây nên muốn tàu kia thế tết chỉ mà có bé hệ lỡ thế hay thì cóภาษากับก็ตรงนี้อันนี้สิอยู่ก็ชื่อตัวมาโอเคแล้วย่อให้เดียก็ภาษาตัวมาอุดมก็ตัวเนอะเราอุดมก็อยู่ปอ so these are some of the things that is never okay y'all know is all constitute domestic violence there in the community so ตัวทางที่กู office มากูยังแค่เราเลยเดียเตจีเนี่ยตัวสุปอเดียเตยาเนี่ยอิสุว่า你谁知道了？你还知道我家弄哪了？对着你要去我给哈，就是嘛，你老路到了，你还要的，头你到了，还要么的，你会有给造假了，你有错造假了，你造假嘛，你 never take 你好话vì tu victim นะ你去保下啲ก็ละหายหรือซื้อละอย่างก็อยู่ที่นั่นนะแต่ก็ยังต้อง educate แล้ว下啲ก็ว่า they know is never alright with the law and the law take it very seriously นะ okay
Thank you. 都还看到要 attorney 公职服务 and I think probation officer Neng Xiong, you wanted to answer that too? Yes. Yep. The question is, with the case of the domestic violence that comes to your attention, can you speak about the decision-making process and how cases are allocated?
Okay. So I guess I can't answer that first part of the allocation of the cases. However, coming from Ramsey County, I work in the domestic abuse unit, which is we have a specific caseload which handles all the Ramsey County cases within Ramsey County. It's divided between, I believe we have 16 agents right now supervising. But the cases are, ranging from serious assaults, felony assaults, down to misdemeanor domestic. Misdemeanors would be considered low contact or lower, and then it goes up to gross misdemeanor, and then it goes up to felony level. So if it's a first-time offender, usually clients are given a misdemeanor sentence, which is usually anywhere from 1 year up to 2 years, depending on what the judge decides. And then the gross misdemeanors are 2 years, and felony level offenses can range anywhere from 5 to 7 to however many years. And how they split that up is a felony level is anything that if they're placed on probation, it's anything that's a year and a day or more. Gross misdemeanor is usually 365 days and under, and then a misdemeanor would be 90 days and below that. So I currently work with a high-risk caseload. It's a mixture of misdemeanors to gross misdemeanors to felony level, and what I mean by high risk is if they're considered high risk based on the we have this assessment tool called the LSCMI, and if they're considered high risk, they are to meet with me well, it's a little different now with the COVID protocols, but they meet with me twice a month. If they're medium contact, they meet with me once a month, and low contact once a month. So that's, I'll touch on more a little bit later with the other questions, but that just a little brief on the domestic violence supervision.
Great, thank you, Probation Officer Xiong.
Are you able to ask the question, I think, the question you asked, I don't think that Food A really answered it. I'd like to hear from law enforcement, especially because we know like Zia Yang was murdered after the police was called to her house 15 times in 1 year. We also know that many, and I've done work in the Hmong community advocating for domestic violence advocates for over 20 years. And I know that a lot of our victims and survivors who have died, a lot of the victims and survivors get restraining orders. And majority of the ones who have died actually have restraining orders in place. And yet they still die. I want to know how you all allocate cases and how you all are prioritizing who to respond to and who not to. As we know, statistics also show that 11% of victims and survivors who have died from homicide actually have restraining orders. And 75% of victims who call the police report not feeling safe anyways.
Thank you for your comment. Inspector Chinu Lee or one of the two investigators, you guys are more than welcome to answer her questions.
So to kind of answer your question, at least with the Sheriff's Office, if anytime we are called to a domestic dispute, verbal altercation, we always respond, meaning we always have an officer come to the call. Sometimes what we'll see is it called in and then somebody calling back saying everything's fine, everything's good. We still have the responsibility to go and ensure that everything is okay. At that time, we talk with both sides. If the victim says they're fine, we can't necessarily force them out of their home. We do provide services in domestic violence calls, or if someone's going to be arrested for domestic assault, the Sheriff's Office has a responsibility of completing a lethality form with the victim, which is a series of questions that can help us determine how big of a risk their situation is. We then provide them what our agency calls as a blue card, which is a list of resources for victims of violence, shelters, that sort of thing. We also, while we're on scene, offer to call the Tubman Center, which is a victim advocate resource, and speak with them while we're there if they want to. So we try to do a lot on the front end, right when we respond to a call, and then on the investigation piece, we only get a case if it's a felony level. So if it comes to us, chances are this family has a history of domestic violence. Somebody's been arrested multiple times before in it. We do our part, so we'll follow up with the victim. Sometimes we'll have 2, 3, 4 conversations with the victim following an arrest. We do push for those harassment restraining orders. The difference is a harassment restraining order is something that they can do on their own. You don't need to have an arrest to go apply for a harassment restraining order. That is something that you can do on your own. The no contact orders, those are what are issued by the judge. And sometimes they don't. I'd say more times than not, a judge does issue those orders. But again, I understand your concern. It's a piece of paper, right? It's not going to stop somebody from doing what they want to do. It's just what we can do on our end that, hey, if you do violate this order, we can come back to arrest you based on that. Does that answer your question?
That, and I think like my follow-up question is then how what we've also seen is when the police is called, oftentimes the victim is actually arrested and criminalized for seeking help.
Sure, and I've experienced that where both parties are arrested, you know, both give different encounters of what happened. Typically, it's our job as patrol deputies to try to figure out who is the victim and who is the offender. Sometimes it's not crystal clear, so they do have to arrest both. I think that happens very rarely, but it does happen. And then hopefully it gets sorted out. Unfortunately, yes, they might have to spend a night in jail, but hopefully it can get sorted out then when we go to do interviews, get additional information, such as phone records that police officers just can't deal with right there on the scene. But it's our job then to investigate it and look into it a little bit further. Maybe it's follow-up conversations with other people that were there or know of the situation, photos, like I said, text messages, that sort of thing.
And then my other question, I want to hear from the clan side of Hmong community, so maybe if you take on, to lo luôn nói đấy nhá, các bạn được hỏi áo thì khi thầy tiền chúng nó biết về tôi là thầy á, rồi cái hôm nay sự bỏ tàu thầy tiền, nhà có một tụi nó tàu thầy tàu, kể lúc tin trai có đặt mua đi mua trà thì lúc tin trai có, rồi cái mong có thể là cái gì rồi rồi sẽ nghe, ni lúc chỉ đi tàu đi nhà được má sẽ có của mình cái chính mua đi mua trà, cái chính mua tụi nó tàu thầy tàu, của cả lớn của đấy này lớn của thầy cho cái tin trai cả lớn của muốn cho cái dạng đầu tiên cả lớn của xa các cổ chúng ta lớn tiên cho họ bình tàu bé qua của cho họ được lắp lên người xong mà thật cũng cho có điểm hai về thứ để tin á mà nếu như chứng minh họ chơi nè especially cái chứng minh một cha nè so vì sao họ để lúc chỉ được họ là một lý do cho nên allocate the case nó lý do.
Thank you. I think that was actually one of the questions. I just want to add on to Molly and just make sure we get a clear picture in terms of, you know, the arrests and whatnot, and from the law enforcement side, and then I'll hand the mic over. But thank you. Great questions. I think a lot of the stuff you talk about have so much wrapped into it, and you know, unfortunately, the questions are not going fast enough to keep up with this. But to add on to what Molly's saying, law enforcement going to a call, you know, when we think about government, we think that, you know, there is a very good structure there and communication established, reports, and you know, detention, law enforcement, all interconnected. But most of the time, that's not the case. So for example, you know, when there's a no contact order that a court puts out, it takes days before a law enforcement officer can actually have that in the databases they use. You know, the emergency communication does a tremendous job trying to gather that information. And before I move forward, I just want to credit the emergency communication center. Can you put your hands up really quickly? I'm going to be referencing them to a lot. They are vital to our operation on the law enforcement side. But, you know, in a perfect world, yes, you know, we should have those systems, and hopefully technology and things in the future will help enhance that. But coming back to arresting victims, obviously during an investigation, you got to remember the law enforcement officers are there at a very fresh problem, and they have to be able to dissect it, and it means to stop the imminent or immediate threat, and then proceed to do further investigations on that. So I just want to make sure that picture's there. But great questions. Thank you very much. I love the provoking questions, and hopefully we'll move the questions quick enough to kind of fill in this.
Jason Chukin Takate, I'm going to continue on after this, and then we'll have your questions towards the end. So we're just going to keep going with our panelists and the questions here. I'm going to let him answer this question, and then we're going to continue on with our panelists and the questions we have here.
Okay, 我叫我做建农，佢有第一邊來路內水機，然後佢醫生，佢實睇到這年夢有種嘢種子種咗嚟做話，嚟又都真正有頭髮頭遮，嚟又俾人才，啲就都換咗啲條咯。學幾俾我得明咯，好過醫生，俾我做幾巴，又係啲講我得明，就係啲個全部年冇子。我攞嚟讀字，聽中個日子做幾處小學生，有呢係我哋咗年就只係嚟碌讀就係斷柴，你多到好過醫生，俾人到你課管人論ra，佢啲因為俾啥個做幾耐落後生到呢種個日子，貼住摸做幾工作嚟又摸做幾種嘅嘢，但係我必須嚟到摸咯，佢啲我係做啲。 có họ mùi vừa tụ chai mùi vừa ý ya mùi vừa chỉ mùi vừa trở hai lò này tua bé quỷ sừng vừa ba này bé yuan chia mấy công mùi vừa trở lên cho kinh chào có thì bé hay cho địa cái sinh đầu sinh tua này trong cái nhiệt chỉ hậu sinh là một cho họ yêu sinh đầu sinh tua là thọ này tua đó quỷ sừng bây giờ muốn cho cái nhân dân bút đó này to bây giờ muốn này khó còn này hậu sinh tàu nhau một cái khó y giờ chỉ hậu sinh là bây giờ muốn này chế anh ấy nhớ 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 có cho chỉ một cái tên mình trong này thầu giá ta nó khó thì bây cho cái hậu sinh nó giờ bị tê dầu bây đâu cũng ca mà cho để cho gì lấy muốn cho cái mua mình mỏ đâu tụ rồi là chỉ là sai tuần sai tùy mình gì ta chỉ nhớ lúc đấy thì nó hậu bây có ý sinh bây cho đây nó giờ là chỉ khó cho tên mình nó bây giờ sai này trong cái nhiệt chỉ cho cái trong ý dạng của bây giờ khó còn dân hơn ra chỉ nhớ hai tiếng có hiệu tụi dân có hiệu tụi sư là hiệu có sư cũng sai tháng của hồ nó đâu trồng không số tụi na giờ đến đây một tên mình thọ chọn thì cho cái tên mình đâu đi trong cái nhiệt chỉ tôi nhớ hậu của ý sinh bây giờ đời này cái tên mình cũng hay tụi sa mediation thì cho culture nó đồ hậu cũng đời nó tàu trong đó là cho tên mình nó chỉ biết một đời biết một trò này còn nếu sau một tên mình cũng cho lù gì thả bé lại nó sẽ của trâu đó họ có họ phiền này chỉ trâu đó là có họ mà nông gì của trâu này.
我从头这次就见到， Thank you to Council Jia Ying for answering that question.